Hello everyone, and welcome to my The Bold Fans channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The fall leaves fell like silent tears outside the exquisite location where Hope Logan and Carter Walton said their vows. The air was thick with the perfume of flowers and the hum of anticipation, as visitors dressed to the nines filled the room with joyous whispers. Hope stood radiant in her ivory gown, her gaze fixed on Carter, who looked at her with adoration that seemed to hold the universe together. The officiant's voice carried quietly across the audience, bringing the couple through their vows of love and loyalty. For a moment everything was great, but perfection is fleeting, and in the world of the Forresters and Logans, secrets have a tendency of rising to the surface. As Hope put the ring onto Carter's finger, her grin beaming, a voice broke the silence like a stone through glass. "He's your biological son." Thomas Forrester's cry rang out through the hall, sharp and jagged, breaking through the visitors' murmuring. Every head turned, and gasps echoed throughout the audience like a chilly wind. Hope halted, her hand still gripping Carter's, her eyes wide with surprise. Carter's face constricted, with perplexity and horror in his eyes. The officiant faltered, and the service came to a halt. Thomas stood at the back of the room, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with agony and anger. His sister, Steffi, attempted to grip his arm and whisper frantically, but he shook her off. "They deserve to know the truth," he exclaimed, pointing to Hope. "You cannot build a marriage on lies." Brooke Logan, Hope's mother, rose from her seat, her face pallid but defiant. "Thomas, stop it. This is not the time or location." Her voice quivered, but there was steel below. The guests stared, transfixed, as the sight unfolded like a tragedy that they couldn't turn away from. Carter turned to Hope, his voice barely audible. "What's he talking about, Hope? What's happening?" Hope's lips parted, but no words emerged. Her gaze shifted to Thomas, then to her mother, and finally back to Carter. The weight of the moment pressed down and suffocated her. I don't know what he's saying," she muttered, but her voice was weak. Thomas took a step forward, his face masked with sorrow. "Do not lie to him, Hope. Not now. Not after everything." He turned to Carter, his voice softening but not losing intensity. "Carter, you've got a son. You have never heard of this boy before." The room became chaotic as Hope revealed what she had known all along. Guests whispered furiously, some standing to obtain a better view, while others clutched their partners in shock. Thomas's father, Ridge Forrester, stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Brooke, who appeared to be floating above the ground. "Brooke," he asked, scarcely audible, "is this true?" Brooke shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "No, Ridge. It's not, it can't be." Her words wavered and her doubt was clear. Hope's hands trembled as she held Carter's hand. "I promise, Carter, I didn't know. I have no idea what he's talking about." Her voice cracked and tears streamed down her cheeks. Carter's countenance tightened, and his faith wavered as he searched her face for answers she couldn't provide. Before anyone could process the revelation further, sirens sounded outside. The venue's doors sprang wide, and two police officers stepped inside, their faces somber. "Brooke Logan," one of them stated, "you're under arrest." The room gasped once more, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air from the space. Brooke's eyes widened, and her hand moved to her chest. "Arrest? For what?" she demanded, her voice increasing with panic. The cop moved closer, holding a pair of handcuffs. "For manipulating court documents and concealing information on a minor's parentage." Ridge stepped to her side and touched her arm, reminding her that she had the right to remain silent. "This is a mistake," he stated, his voice solid but wavering. "Brooke, what is happening?" Brooke's gaze flashed around the room, landing on Hope, then Thomas, and finally back on the police. I didn't do anything wrong," she said, but her words sounded empty even to herself. The cops softly but forcibly grasped her arms and led her to the exit while the guests watched in stunned silence. Hope sank in a chair, her wedding veil twisted in her hands, tears flowing down her cheeks. Carter stood immobile, jaw hard and eyes remote. "Hope," he continued last, his voice frigid, "you must tell me the truth. Now." But Hope could only shake her head, her sobbing stifling her speech. "I did not know, Carter. I promise I didn't know. Thomas, still standing in the rear, watched the situation develop, his heart heavy from what he'd done. He didn't want to ruin Hope's wedding, but the truth had been brewing inside him for too long. Years ago, he overheard a cryptic but damaging exchange between Brooke and a lawyer concerning a child whose paternity was unknown. He didn't realize the full extent of it at the time, but as he pieced together the parts over time, the truth became clear. Carter had a kid, now over 10 years old, who was reared by another family and was oblivious of his biological father. And Brooke was aware, had arranged the cover-up to protect Hope, the family, and to keep the past hidden. As the cops dragged Brooke away, Thomas felt nothing but sadness. He had hoped that revealing the truth would provide solace, but it had instead shattered the fragile tranquility of everyone he loved. Steffi approached him, her eyes filled with rage. Why, Thomas? Why now? Couldn't you wait till after the wedding? I couldn't let her marry him without his knowledge, Thomas added, his voice low. Carter deserved the truth. So did Hope. Steffi shook her head, tears in her eyes. You have damaged her, Thomas. You've wrecked all of us. The sirens faded outside as Brooke was whisked away, her thoughts racing with memories she had wanted to forget. Years ago, in a moment of desperation, she made a decision to shield Hope from the sorrow of a complex truth. Carter was young and just beginning out in his job when he had a brief connection with a woman named Lila. When Lila became pregnant, she informed Brooke, not Carter, that the child was his. But Lila was unstable, her life spiraling, and Brooke had persuaded her to give the child up for adoption, promising to manage everything. She had changed documents, paid off officials, and ensured that the youngster was put with a loving family away from the chaos of the Forrester world. She'd kept the secret to herself, believing it was best. But secrets, like wounds, fester if left untreated. Brooke had never told Hope about Carter's child with someone else for fear of breaking her daughter's heart. She'd never told Carter, feeling he'd be better off without the responsibility of raising a child he couldn't support. And she had never informed Ridge, knowing how that would strain their already shaky relationship. But Thomas had figured it out, and now the world was disintegrating. Hope sat alone inside the venue, as the visitors had dispersed in awkward quiet. Carter had departed, wanting time to comprehend the revelation. The wedding was abandoned, the vows unfinished, and the rings left on the altar. Hope's heart hurt with pain she couldn't identify. She wasn't sure whether Carter would ever forgive her, even if she hadn't known the truth. She wasn't sure if she could forgive her mother. And she wasn't sure if she could forgive herself for the life she might have unwittingly taken from a young boy who didn't even know his father. In the days that followed, the Forrester and Logan families were overwhelmed by the aftermath. Brooke's arrest made headlines, and the incident rocked Forrester Creations, pushing its stock down. Ridge stood by her and hired the best lawyers, but the tension between them rose with each unresolved question. Hope and Carter's relationship hung on a thread, and their love was tested by a truth neither expected. And Thomas, rejected by his family for his outburst, went into seclusion, plagued by the anguish he had inflicted. The child at the center of it all, Ethan, lived blissfully with his adoptive family, completely unconscious of the storm developing around his roots. He was a bright, curious boy with Carter-like eyes and a smile that could light up a room. Carter's world, too, would soon be rocked by the truth, as he began the difficult process of seeking for him, determined to know the son he had no idea existed. As the weeks stretched into months, the wound stayed sore. Hope and Carter attempted to reconnect, but their trust was delicate, like a broken glass vase that could never be completely repaired. Brooke stood trial, her reputation in ruins and her heart laden with regret. And Thomas, alone with his thoughts, questioned whether the truth had been worth the cost. In the quiet moments when the world slowed and the pain faded into a dull ache, they all struggled with the same question. What does it mean to love someone when the truth may break them apart? For the Forresters and Logans, the answer was as elusive as the autumn leaves that fell outdoors, swept away by a wind that promised no answers but just change. The music had only just begun to play when the truth shattered the ceremony like a hurricane crashing through delicate glass. Hope stood there, her white gown catching the golden light of the chandeliers, her veil fluttering against her cheek as a small draft slipped through the old church doors. Carter, as steady as ever, clasped her hand, his face calm yet hopeful, providing the quiet strength she had relied on for so long. Friends and relatives packed the pews, all with bright eyes and warm grins, eager to witness the union of two hearts that had promised each other forever. But then Thomas's voice broke through the silence. His voice, shaking with desperation and fire, broke through the silence. "He's your biological son." The gasps rose like a wave, rolling through the cathedral, followed by a sudden, heavy silence that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the chamber. Hope blinked once, twice, and her hand tightened around Carter's without her realizing it. Carter's chest rose and fell, the confident beat of a man about to make vows abruptly breaking into uneven stumbles. Hope slowly moved her head, her gaze catching Thomas's. His normally precise, controlled expression was flushed with emotion. His hands trembled as he gripped the side of the pew, his entire body falling forward as if the truth he held was too heavy for him to remain upright. "Thomas," she said over the few feet separating them. "You can't marry him," Thomas said, his voice cracking, almost imploring. "Not without knowing. Not without the truth. That tiny kid, Douglas, is your son, Hope. Not mine. Not Liam's. Yours." The world tilted. Hope felt the ground move beneath her feet as the significance of his words slammed into her chest. Her son? She could still remember the small fingers curled around hers in the hospital room years ago. The baby was briefly placed in her arms before being rushed away by doctors. She had been told that he had not survived, that problems had killed him before he had a chance to live. She had mourned him, buried the memory of him, and spent years silently carrying the hurt. And now here was Thomas, informing her that the child she had lost was alive, breathing, laughing, and smiling, that he had been calling someone else mommy. Hope's knees sagged. Carter supported her, but she wrenched her hand away from his, sliding back a step. Her voice shook. "You are lying." Thomas shook his head and stepped closer. "It is. I did not want to tell you. I didn't want this day to turn into—" His words paused, his throat tightened. "But I couldn't watch you stand there making vows to him when you didn't know. I couldn't let you construct a life around a secret this large. Douglas, you deserve to know who your child is." Douglas is sweet and gentle, with brilliant eyes and a modest curiosity. Hope's mind raced with memories of how she had always been drawn to him and treated him with a natural, instinctual tenderness. She remembered how, when he fell asleep in her arms, his breathing would settle as if he had found a home there. She had believed it was just her love for a child who needed motherly care. But suddenly the parts were falling into place with devastating clarity. Tears welled up in her eyes as the truth took root within her. She looked to Carter, searching for something to hold her together. Carter's expression was impenetrable, with his lips squeezed tightly together and his gaze flickering between her and Thomas. "Is this true?" Hope mumbled, the words wavering as they left her lips. Carter closed his eyes. So that was the solution. The hush within the church was terrible. Guests sat stunned, wondering whether to speak, go, or pretend they hadn't just seen lives collapse in front of them. "Why?" Hope's voice broke and her sobs echoed quietly. "Why are you hiding this from me? Carter, how could you?" Carter took a step forward, his hand reaching for hers again, but she backed away, clutching her chest as if to keep herself together. "I didn't know how to tell you," he said, his voice hoarse. "When I discovered the truth, I assumed I was protecting you. You have been grieving for so long, Hope. I couldn't stand to reopen the wound. I believed it could be better. Better." Hope's voice became sharper and stronger, but it shook with the weight of her sadness. "Would it be better to let me believe my son was gone? Better to make me believe I was insane for feeling something every time I looked at Douglas? You deprived me of years with him. Years I'll never get back." Her chest heaved and tears streamed freely, ruining the exquisite lace of her robe. The room blurred as she struggled to see through the anguish that had overwhelmed her. Thomas approached again, his voice lower now. "I tried to do the right thing, Hope, but Carter knew more than I did. He should have told you." Carter's jaw clenched. "You do not comprehend, Thomas. You've never had to bear the weight of breaking bad news to someone. And you think that letting her stand here about to marry you, only to find out like this is better?" Thomas snapped, his voice breaking with anguish. Hope raised her hands as if pleading them both to stop. "Enough. Both of you." Her sobbing separated the words. She looked away from them, her attention falling on the altar, the flowers she had carefully chosen, and the rings laying in a velvet box, ready to be exchanged. Everything seemed meaningless now, as if it belonged to another planet, another woman who hadn't just had her heart ripped apart. The heaviness of sorrow and treachery crushed her. She remembered Douglas' smile, laugh, and how his small hand fit so perfectly in hers. It was her son, her child. Even yet she had missed his first words, steps, and everything. Time had been taken from her, and nothing could restore it. Carter grabbed for her again, but she backed away, shaking her head. "Don't," she whispered. "Do not touch me. You snatched him from me, Carter. Not by blood or choice, but by silence. And I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to forgive you for that." Her voice broke, her sobs pulling at every heart in the room. The guests shuffled uncomfortably, some with tears in their eyes, others staring at the floor, giving her the solitude she no longer had. Thomas's expression was filled with sadness, and his shoulders slumped as if the revelation had broken him as well. But Hope had barely noticed him by now. All she could feel was the empty ache of years lost, a frigid hollowness where joy should have existed. She collected the fabric of her gown in her quivering hands before turning away from the altar. The music that had once promised bliss now felt horribly ironic, like a soundtrack to a life she could no longer live. Each step she made toward the church doors rang as a farewell, her veil dragging lightly down the floor behind her. Carter called her name once, his voice strained and imploring, but she did not turn back. Because at that point, she understood her future had already been rewritten. Not with vows or rings, but with the painful realization that she had always had a kid and had been denied love for far too long. And as the doors closed behind her, the sound of her sobs echoed in the solitude, a reminder that certain truths, no matter how vital, convey a sadness too profound to express. Outside the church, the night air was chilly and thick, with the scent of rain lingering from earlier in the day. Hope's chest lifted and fell with short, ragged gasps as she staggered down the stairs. The gown that had once made her feel dazzling now clung to her like a burden she wanted to rip off. The street lamps threw long shadows on the cobblestones, like dark fingers reaching for her. Her knees almost buckled as she thought of Douglas again. How many times had he gazed at her with those big, trusting eyes, as if he knew she was his? How many times had she brushed his hair back, kissed his forehead, and walked away, believing she was merely a friend, a source of comfort in his chaotic world? She clamped her palms to her face and let out a half-sob, half-scream. Inside, Carter was transfixed at the altar, his hands quivering at his sides. He had always assumed he was strong, and that his silence served as a barrier, but now he understood the true consequences of his decision. Thomas sat in the pew, head buried in his hands, his own guilt strangling him. And Douglas, innocent and naive, was waiting someplace, pining for love he didn't realize had always been his mother's to provide.